It's time for another book versus adaptation where I watch the adaptation, then read the book, and decide which is better based on the plot, characters, and relationships. Today, we're talking about The School for Good and Evil. There will be spoilers in this video, so you can either use the chapters down below to skip ahead and see which one I liked better, or you can check out one of my other book versus adaptations here. Okay, let me start off by saying that I actually feel really conflicted about this one. There is a lot to unpack with these two stories. So while I normally only give one overarching point for the plot, I feel like I need to break it down a little bit more for this one because there were things I liked better in the book and there were things that I liked better in the movie. First, I found it interesting how in the book, everyone in Gabaldon knew about the School for Good and Evil. The night the schoolmaster comes to take away the students has this very kind of old school Halloween tradition of, put jack-o'-lanterns in your windows and wear masks so the evil spirits can't get you. I thought that this was a bit more interesting than how they did it in the movie. Also, the concept of the reader is explained much better in the book. The movie doesn't mention the reader prophecy at all, and since it was kind of a major plot point in the book, I'm surprised that it wasn't there. The book also goes into the school life of the students a lot better than the movie does. Now, this might just be a time concern, but I really enjoyed how we got a deeper dive into the curriculum of the school, and that the curriculum is all centered around surviving fairy tales. One of the major plot points in the books is that if you fail these classes, you end up getting changed into a magical creature. We do see this in the movie, but it's a much bigger part of the books. It's an ever-present threat that the students are facing. That being said, I do like that we get to know the character of Gregor.
I'm Gregor. Gregor Charming.
Before he ends up getting turned into that, monster bird thing that Tedros kills in the movie. It does end up making that scene much more emotional. So for this, I think I actually have to give a point to both. Let's talk about the trial. In the movie, the trial is specifically for Sophie and Tedros to prove their love. The idea for this is there in the book, but the trial is something that exists outside of that, with Sophie and Tedros' tests being in it. It's actually a bit more of like a non-lethal or mostly non-lethal Hunger Games that the students have to go through. At the end of the day, I think the stakes are higher for Sophie and Tedros in the movie, so I'm going to give the point to that. When talking about setting, I feel like the movie did a great job with the two schools, but I feel like the forest was better in the book. The scarecrows are so much more terrifying in the book because of that aspect of they can kind of mimic people that you know, and that's terrifying. In the movie, the flowers are scarier than the scarecrow. When it comes to the climax of this story, I feel like the movie won this one. In the book, we get hints of what might be going on, but it's not very well developed. The movie definitely improves upon this with the addition of blood magic and more scenes with Raval. It's an ever-present threat that ends up being slowly revealed instead of just suddenly appearing. I don't normally talk about themes so much in these videos, but I feel like with this story in particular, I need to address it. The movie very lightly goes over how the School for Good has become vapid and shallow, which is a point made in the movie, but it's definitely a bigger part of the book and it's more pervasive. But what the movie doesn't go over is how the outcasts are usually the villains. I honestly can't say that the Nevers are anything of what I would call evil. They just had something that made society see them as not good. What makes Agatha and Sophie unique, and I feel like the reason why they feel like they're in the wrong schools, is that for the most part, Sophie is truly evil and Agatha is truly good. And what society thinks about good or evil doesn't matter in their case, whereas it seems to matter with everybody else. The movie doesn't really address this other than to queer code a lot of the Nevers. And that actually ends up being a problem because they didn't embrace that message. So I'm giving another point to the book. The characters are really interesting to look at between the book and the adaptation. I won't go over all the characters because there are way too many, but I will go over the characters that are either drastically different between the book and the adaptation or that are important characters. I have very strong feelings about Dot in the book. The book is honestly really fat-phobic, and as a fat person, I can say this with all honesty that the depiction of fat people in media is important. Dot is one of the sweetest, no pun intended, characters in the whole book, and she gets absolutely massacred by both the Evers and Nevers in the book simply because she's fat. I wish there was a greater realization about this in the books, and maybe there is in later books, but there wasn't in this one. The movie subverts this by making Dot a straight size character in the movie, and they actually had a plus size or Hollywood version of plus size, which is still straight size, so I'll give this point to the movie. Hort is interesting. He's obviously there as comic relief, but I actually think it doesn't do his character any justice. He just becomes this outrageous simp.
Sorry about this. Don't worry. You'll still look beautiful to me.
And while he's still a simp in the book, he's at least seems like kind of this nerdy, sweet guy. So I'm giving the point to the book. I'm glad we saw more of the twins in the movie than we did in the book, especially since who doesn't love Lawrence Fishburne and Kit Young? The schoolmaster in the movie is a much more practical character than the Castor and Pollux characters in the book. Plus it adds this layer of insidiousness that Raval has been manipulating things and masquerading as this good character the entire time. Kit was properly enigmatic, and the added scenes that he has with his fascination with Sophie really adds to the pacing of the story. I'll talk about what else it does when I talk about Sophie, but I'm gonna give the point to the adaptation for this one. Michelle Yeoh is hilarious as Professor Anemone. I don't really have anything to say other than I love the scene where she's talking about, I don't give a shit about beauty. I'm a history teacher. It was fabulous.
Do I look like I give a shit about smiling?
Charlize Theron is also amazing as Lady Lesso. I really liked seeing more of her story in the movie, and the addition of her being Raval's failed love just makes Raval that much more insidious. Okay, so really all the professors in the movie are fabulously portrayed, and Kerry Washington doesn't disappoint as Professor Dovey. The uber fake happiness and then glimpses of realness really point out how things have become so shallow in The School for Good. However, the character itself is not as well developed as it is in the book, and I really missed the fact that she was Cinderella's fairy godmother in the book, and she may be in the movie, but we didn't learn about it. So I'm giving the point to the book. I am so conflicted about Tedros. When I watched the movie, I thought Tedros was a bit of a himbo, but he seemed like a nice guy. Tedros in the books is not. He's really toxic masculinity and white privilege personified. Normally, I would say that would mean I would like the adaptation better, but unfortunately, I think the change actually made the character boring. I hate Tedros in the book, but at least I feel like he's a three-dimensional character. I kept having to remind myself that Sophie is supposed to be annoying in the movie, but that's just what she is in the movie. Annoying. I never bought that she was truly evil. In the book, she comes off as truly evil. She flat out murders someone. Now, that someone was a torturer, but still, murder. Sophie never murdered anyone in the movie. The manipulation of Raval added in the movie makes Sophie a bit more understandable and less evil. That change makes the character sympathetic and thus redeemable, and it made her redemption at the end feel earned. Her redemption in the book doesn't feel earned at all. Agatha is another character that I feel pretty torn about. I love how confident Aggie is in the movie. She knows who she is and she never doubts herself. This, like Tedros in the movie, is a much healthier depiction. However, I actually really enjoyed Agatha's journey in the book of discovering her self-worth because she's had a lifetime of people telling her she's evil and seeing her realize that she's not and that she is beautiful both inside and out. That was a good journey to witness. And again, by changing that, which there are problematic elements to that for sure, but by changing that, you actually lose Agatha's character arc in the movie. Again, she comes off as a single dimension character. For relationships, I'll start off with Raval and Sophie. As I mentioned when I spoke about Raval, this plot point is a lot more developed in the movie. Maybe a lot is the wrong word to use, but at least it felt developed. Raval makes obvious multiple attempts to manipulate Sophie in the movie, and this makes that plotline feel a lot more developed than it does in the book. Sophie and Hort also have a much better relationship in the book, or at least a closer one. I can't really say it was better. It is one based solely on Sophie's manipulation of him, but that's still better than the simping we got in the movie. Sophie and Tedros. I absolutely hated this relationship in the movie. I felt like Tedros was just interested in her because she was hot, which is the exact opposite of what happens in the book. Yes, the movie has the whole convincing him she's good scene, but that's so different from the long drawn out build of that relationship in the book. There is a part of me that thinks that Sophie and Tedros deserve each other in the book, but I still don't think it was a good relationship. That being said, because it was more than superficial, I'm giving the point to the book. In contrast to Sophie and Tedros, the relationship between Agatha and Tedros in the movie is much healthier than what we see in the book. I know that the book was kind of going for that enemies to lovers feel, but it fell kind of flat. In the movie, their relationship develops because they seem to actually like each other as people. In the book, Tedros didn't really have a choice but be drawn to Agatha's goodness, and he ends up falling for that fairy tale love at first sight. And this is because Tedros truly sees Agatha as a villain in the book, whereas Tedros in the movie never saw Agatha as a villain. Finally, the relationship at the cornerstone of this story, Sophie and Agatha. I have to say, I never really felt like Sophie and Agatha were true friends in the book. Sophie constantly puts Agatha down and gaslights her. In contrast, the movie shows how close these two characters are supposed to be. Again, this made the ending feel actually deserved in the movie because you know that Sophie has goodness in her and thus can be redeemed. So it seems like this is the very first book versus adaptation tie. This tracks, as I would probably rate both the book and the movie 3 stars for my personal level of enjoyment. They both had their problems, but they both had their strengths as well. Check out my book versus adaptation of Shadow and Bone next. Let's see what stories tomorrow brings.